Okay, here we go. Nice and quiet.
Sound speeds, camera rolling.
Holding for sound. Last looks. Calling for last looks.
And set and action.
I need to swap batteries.
You know, making movies is hard.
Making movies is hard.
Welcome to Making Movies is Hard, the podcast about the struggle of being an independent filmmaker. I am Alrik Purcell, the founding host of the podcast. I've been crewing up on sets for over 10 years. I've made a dozen films, shorts and features, either as a producer or a director. And I'm just finishing up my first feature film, The Alternate, which I wrote and directed and co-produced as well.
I'm Liz Minichell. I'm a writer, director, producer with 2 features under my belt and 1 hanging out there in the ether somewhere, just right around the corner. I'm also a former film critic and current distribution consultant who used to manage the creative distribution initiative at Sundance. This week, we welcome writer, director, and actor Nitzan Mager onto the show to talk about her web series, Quarantine, I Love You, which she wrote, produced, and directed during the pandemic, about living in the pandemic. Nitzan talks about how she made the show happen and how she was able to partner with Sundance on the release of her 3rd season. We also talked to Nitzan about making the transition from acting to directing and how she garnered the confidence to really think of herself as a director through the making of Quarantine, I Love You. So after the interview, don't go away because we have an unprecedented Get Shorty where we bring back a filmmaker. I won't even say who. I'm just going to say mystery filmmaker to talk about their second Get Shorty. This one is called Pizza Deliverance. And then at the end, Alrik and I talk about, the nitty gritty, the heartbreaks of being filmmakers. But without any more googly goops, here's our talk with Nitzan. Nitzan, thank you so much for being here with us today. We're going to start with questions about Quarantine, I Love You. So our first question is, can you give us the elevator pitch for the show?
The elevator pitch was a series of interconnected conversations that take place on Zoom during the pandemic.
How many days did you shoot the film?
So it began very informally. At the start of the pandemic, I started writing these short scripts because I couldn't wrap my head around either of the features that I was working on. And then I got in touch with actors that I knew and loved in New York who were usually series regulars on TV shows or in Broadway shows or whatever. And I was like, hey, I wrote this script. Let's get together on Zoom and do a reading. But then the reading kind of ended up morphing into filming it because it was written for the Zoom format. It was people who were on Zoom talking to each other. So it made total sense to just film it on Zoom. So we filmed each episode in a couple hours. They're very short. So I think that there were 8 episodes in the first season, 7 in the first season, 8 in the second season. And then we did like a capsule of a bunch of short episodes for the 3rd season. So whatever, I don't know math, but add that all up. Multiply it by 1.5. That's how many hours we filmed.
What was the rough budget that you can talk about?
Sure. So the first season had 0 budget because I didn't even realize that I was making a show. So it was kind of not official. But then it became official in the 2nd season and we got some grants, which was awesome. And the budget went primarily for paying all the actors. So we went through SAG and paid them the ultra low budget day rate for each episode. And it would be great if my producer was here and she would be able to pull up the spreadsheet with the numbers. But it was not a lot of money. It was about $300 an episode. That was the budget. I mean, because it was great. There wasn't a set. I mean, this is where I did all of my filming in my basement.
Wait, for anything other than cast was $300, right? Just to make sure. I want to.
Yeah, the cast.
Okay. I was like, I can't do the math of that day rate into 300.
Yes, it was like about $150 per actor, and it was usually two actors in a scene. Sometimes there were scenes with multiple actors zooming, like we are right now, the 3 of us. So, and then it was a little bit more, but it worked out to about $300 or so per episode. And there weren't really expenditures. There were a few others, like we had a stipend for our associate producer, Nicole Serrato, who was doing SAG paperwork. And then we also ended up using some of our grant money for help with social media and stuff like that, because I'm super illiterate at ads and social media and things like that. And I hadn't even been on Instagram until the pandemic started, and I'm still not on Twitter. So it was just Facebook, because I'm 90 years old on the inside, which makes me a perfect candidate for Facebook. But anyway, yes, so some of our budget went towards like social media, just setting up the accounts and helping run them.
And then how long did you spend working on the series from, the inception to it being released?
It was a super, super fast turnaround, actually. So in the first season, which I didn't know was a season when I was making it, I ended up just filming all the episodes and then decided to release them all together. So it was just like a month or two. And then in the second season, we timed it so that it was 8 episodes leading up to the election. So it was like, I think 5 episodes leading up to election, the presidential election, and then 3 episodes to chronicle the aftermath. And it was kind of an SNL sort of thing. So I was writing an episode at the beginning of the week, filming it on Thursday, editing it Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and then we would release it at the beginning of the next week. So I actually filmed my first episode. This is going to sound terrible. I'm laughing. It's not. It's sad. But I filmed my first episode, and then Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away.
Oh.
And I was like, oh my God. First of all, I was heartbroken, and I was convinced that the world was going to end the next day. But then I was like, oh my God, I have to write this into the episode that we just filmed, and we have to film it again. And so we went back, and I wrote that in there because I was like, if this is supposed to be current and speaking, and the tag ended up being speaking to the moment in the medium of our times. So I was like, I need to write that in there. So I wrote it, and we refilmed it, and I edited it really quickly. Same thing with like the second episode. I didn't have to reshoot it, but I had to do a really quick rewrite because we had just found out that Donald Trump got COVID right before it. And so I had to write that in. So season 2 was a super fast SNL type turnaround. And then for the third season, we knew that we were going to be doing it in conjunction with the Sundance Film Festival, and it was going to be part of their Beyond Film program. And we wanted it to feel like it's something that covers the beginning of 2021. So I started writing it at the end of December, beginning of January. Then we filmed within a week all of the different little episodes, and it was released during the Sundance Film Festival later in January.
Sounds like your crew was not massive. How big was it?
It was me. The crew was me, mostly. Pretty much it was just me. Because, we didn't have a set. I was meeting the actors on Zoom. So the way that it worked is usually we'd have 2 hours set aside for an episode. We'd meet, we'd talk about the scene, we'd rehearse in a way that kind of just seamlessly moved into the performance, but it was all filmed. And then I edited the episodes and I even created the graphics for the title sequence and everything at the beginning. And yeah, so I had my producing team that was helping with the funding, just getting the funding that I needed. And I also worked with a wonderful casting director who is a friend of mine who helped with the casting for some of the roles. Because some of the actors I knew already, but some of them, like Dennis O'Hare, who ended up taking part, and Ali Wentworth, they were through agents, and I got to them through my casting director friend. So there were definitely people behind the scenes helping put it together, but in terms of like traditional film crew, writer, director, editor, cinematographer, the actors, I should have given them DP credits, all of them, because they were positioning their cameras and their lighting, and they were also their own prop masters and costume designers. So we were all multi-hyphenates.
And then final question, compared to all of the other projects you've made, how difficult was this one?
It was very difficult. I don't know if it's more difficult. It was, yeah, especially like when it became official. At first, when I was just playing around, not knowing what I was really working towards, it was just kind of a fun distraction. But once it became official and there was funding and managers and agents and timelines and deadlines and everything involved, and I'd kind of set it up as this making an episode and releasing an episode per week. And then it was very stressful. And also, you know, I think film is a naturally very collaborative medium. And this was wonderfully collaborative in some ways, in that I got to work with these beautiful, wonderful, talented actors. But most of the behind the scenes, getting everything together and editing and all of that was alone, which was a very foreign film experience for me. So yeah, it was hard. But on the other hand, it was also kind of much easier because it was so accessible. Like I could work with these actors that normally would be much more complicated for me to work with, because suddenly their schedules were much more free. I wasn't asking very much of their time because they didn't have to report to set, and it wasn't a long shooting day. So I feel like in some ways as a filmmaker, I had access to much more than I usually would so easily. And then some aspects of it were harder.
I want to go back to the first two seasons when you were kind of figuring out what it was, because the third season premiered at Sundance and you kind of can anticipate a certain level of amplification, right? But for the first two seasons, how were you convincing actors to participate in this? What was the angle? Was it, you know, were they more free than they normally would be because there were less productions, or what was your pitch?
For the first season, for sure. Everyone was really at the beginning of the pandemic in the US and the beginning of lockdown. And everyone was just home going crazy. So I didn't need to do much convincing. I mean, everybody wanted to read the script, obviously, and I think it hinged on them liking the script and wanting to play the part. But I think it was interesting because everyone was kind of trying to figure out how to pivot in that moment. And people were doing readings of things online. And I think, you know, when I was talking to the actors, some of them were a little bit frustrated by the way that was working, like doing a reading of a feature film on Zoom. It was, it was confusing and long, and I think what resonated for the actors about this is that A, it was short, and B, it was written specifically for Zoom. So it all made sense. Like it was people in the pandemic talking to each other, and it just felt very familiar and organic. And when we were filming, you know, I would take out my little box on the Zoom screen, and it was just the two of them talking to each other. And I think that writing for the medium specifically made it an appealing project for them to work on. And in the second season, when I was reaching out to actors who I didn't have a direct relationship to, I think a big part of the pitch was them seeing the episodes that had already been created and enjoying those episodes, and some really lovely actors had taken part in those as well. So I think it kind of set a standard. And then reading the script, which oftentimes I would tweak with them in mind. Once I knew which actors we were approaching, I would be like, oh, this person would be so great. So I was really writing it with the actors in mind. And I think that, that made it appealing for them too.
I'm really curious about set dressing, like in the way that you would have the actors get their backgrounds ready. Like, did you do any of that, or was it just sort of like, oh, whatever was there you would just go with? Like, did you set aside time to talk and discuss about the backgrounds?
Yeah, we did. Like at the beginning of our rehearsal, we would be on Zoom, and then I would see where they were, and if the background was was working. Some of them had a real knack for it and set everything up really perfectly with the lighting and everything in advance. And sometimes it wasn't perfect at the beginning, and we'd, move around and kind of tweak what worked. And we were also filming across several different countries. So I had an actor in Paris and London and the Dominican Republic and New Zealand. And so it was figuring out also time zones, because sometimes the script was written that the two characters are actually in the same house. Like, for example, there's a husband and wife who aren't talking to each other. So they're talking to each other via Zoom, even though they're in the same house. But one actor was in London and another actress was here in New York. And so just like matching the lighting so that the daytime, day night works. So we kind of figured it out, I think, as we went along. And then some actors are just natural lighting and set designers.
I'm trying to put together like what your week or your day might have been like when you first started, or maybe even, in second season, third season, because we're in a global pandemic. I don't know what your day job is, but you're producing this content on a regular basis, not really knowing if it's going to be monetized, right? Because it's episodic and it's like this Wild West and all these questions. And then just keeping on pushing forward in the creation of this content. So I guess I'm curious, how did you sustain the level of enthusiasm while in the midst of just like massive global trauma?
Well, I think really at the beginning, I had a very part-time day job that moved to be remotely in a kind of complicated way. I was doing like song leading and storytelling for little kids, which moved to Zoom, which was interesting. But I think that for me, it was a really necessary creative outlet. So that's where my energy was coming from. It was definitely not with any sort of eye on monetizing it or even really building on it in the long term, because at every point when we were making it, it was never clear what was going to happen next and how long. I mean, when I was making the first season, I had no idea that we'd get to a third season because I thought that it would be over already. I mean, I think even now it's production has picked up for people who can afford to add whatever they need to 28% additional budget for COVID compliance. But yeah, I think it was always the intention to just find a creative outlet and not as like a career stepping stone something. I mean, I think it's interesting because it ended up leading to some really interesting opportunities, not monetary things per se, but just career-wise. I think it ended up opening doors, which I think is sort of always the case when you're when you're being creative and you're working on something that excites you. You can't really anticipate where it will lead, but it's always good to be making something. But after the first season was done, I no longer had my day job. I was employed by unemployment, which was actually great. It was a great time to be unemployed because it gave me more free time. And I felt like one of those fancy Europeans who I'd always meet at film festivals. And they're like, oh yes, my government paid for me to make my film. And then they sent me to this film festival for my short. I was like, wow, that's amazing. We don't have that here. But now I kind of feel like I'm a government supported artist without the government knowing. So yes, I actually ended up also teaching a class in the midst of part of this. I taught for a semester a class on making films on Zoom to film students who, this was a great way for them to be able to continue doing productions while social distancing. So I think it's actually a great teaching tool, making these sorts of Zoom films, because it really forces a filmmaker to narrow in on writing good dialogue and working with actors, which, especially in film school, those two things often fall by the wayside. So it was actually a great experience.
Do you see yourself making more movies on Zoom, like outside of Quarantine I Love You? Like, is it something that you want to continue to do even when things are opened up and you can go back on sets?
I'm a little zoomed out. at the moment. But I do wonder about that. I have thought about that because it does feel like there's been a big cultural shift. People are going to continue doing much more on Zoom than they ever did before. And it can be a really wonderfully visual medium, and it's very cheap to film on Zoom. And again, I think very kind of accessible in terms of the actors that you're able to work with because it's time efficient. So yeah, I mean, I think it is a possibility, but I don't have plans at the moment for it.
Show is to like demystify some processes of production, but also to like dispel myths. So you got into Sundance, you got into this Beyond Film program. That is like essentially what people call a lottery ticket, right? And not an unearned lottery ticket, but statistically, it's very hard to get the attention of these companies and these nonprofits and support organizations. Can you talk about the direct result of Sundance in the sense of like, did an agent call you the next day, or did you receive? What happened?
Well, first, for full disclosure and transparency, we didn't apply with the finished product to Sundance and get accepted. The process was different because it was actually made for this Beyond Film initiative. So I was already collaborating with Leila Meadow-Connor and her organization Mama Film on the second season of Quarantine, I Love You. And she was working with Sundance and her organization, Mama Film, as a satellite partner for Sundance. And so that's how we kind of came aboard this special initiative that they had. Really, for the first time, it was part of their being a remote festival for the first time. So I feel like we kind of just, snuck in to the Sundance label in a kind of surprising way, definitely not a traditional route of applying to Sundance and getting accepted into the film festival. And so there wasn't oh, your project is up on the Sundance site and you're there. I wasn't at the festival to meet and schmooze, and because there was no festival. But I think that having that stamp, that Sundance stamp, is inevitably going to be helpful. And you were talking about kind of demystifying how things work. I think it is kind of mystifying still to me, because I think that all of these kind of stamps of approval, what people are really looking for is just that you've been vetted by someone in some way. Yeah, I don't know what it means.
It's stupid is what it means, but it sounds you understand that.
Yeah, I think I think the thing is that, right, if my toilet's overflowing, I need a plumber. I can either go to no one has a phone book, but wherever you go, Google, to find a plumber, or I can call my friend and be like, hey, have you ever had a really great plumber? My toilet's overflowing. And they're like, oh yeah, I've used this guy. He's fantastic. Or gal, plumber, whatever. So you do that because then you know that this person's been tried and tested, and they're going to fix your toilet. So I feel like filmmaking is a very risky proposition because it's usually very expensive to make a film. And it demands the cooperation of a lot of people, and a lot of people giving their time and resources and money. And so it's a risky proposition, and people want some sort of assurance that it's going to work and that you're going to work and you're going to do your job. But on the other hand, it's also an art form. In Hollywood, it's become very much like a business form, but it is an art form. And so it is very subjective, and who's a good artist and what's a good film, and does Sundance like it, and do I like the films that play at Sundance? I mean, it's just all very who the hell knows, but everyone's trying to get a read on something that will make it feel like more of a sure thing and less of a risky bet, which I think it always ultimately is a very risky bet. So that's what I think that is. And so you kind of have to spin your story and get as many people recommending you as a plumber as possible.
With that in mind, now that the show is done, I mean, are you doing a fourth season, or is it?
No, there's no fourth season in the work. I'm really happy to be getting back to my feature script projects that can't be filmed via Zoom and will cost millions of dollars to make. But I did feel like I was ready to, at the beginning of the pandemic, I was like banging my head against the wall trying to work on those projects and stepped away. And now I feel really eager to go back to them.
So the question from there is like, are you basically back at square one now after the show is out? Is it just like, finishing your script, raising money, just the same process that you would have done before then? Or has this somehow opened up some new doors, new avenues for you that are going to kind of make it easier to, get your work done?
Yeah, I think it provided me some really invaluable experience as a writer and director. And I think it gave me some credibility as a director working with such wonderful actors. I mean, like no one's an A-list celebrity, super famous person, but a lot of recognizable, wonderful actors. So I think that having that under my belt is definitely super helpful for me personally. Like I know that I learned a lot from the process, and I feel like as a credential, I think that's going to be helpful. And as a writer, I think that it sharpened my writing skills, just having to do this really fast turnaround. And I think that for the scripts that I am working on, I think one door in to getting things made is having actors who are excited to act in the project. And I think that I've maybe also built credibility with potential actors who I could reach out to. And I think that could help get the project made. And I also am considering doing one thing that I said at the beginning was a really bad idea at the beginning of the pandemic, which is a reading of my feature scripts, because I feel like I do have a better understanding of how it could work now in this medium. And I think that it would allow me to get some really great actors together for reading those roles. And then that's, as opposed to the reading that I was supposed to have for one of my features last April at this really wonderful theater in New York. And I had, and the theater was like excited about hosting the reading for the screenplay and getting great New York theater actors on board for the reading. But that would have just happened, one time. And I could have invited like X people and who knows who would have showed up. But if I do a virtual reading, then potentially it's something that I could share in the future. With agents and managers or with investors. Yeah, so I think that I'm not back to square one. I think both as an artist, I've grown, and I do think that that the experience will act as some sort of stamp of approval for getting new projects made. I hope.
I have a question, but as per usual, it's not fully formed. So let's see if we could get there while I talk. You are a caretaker. You're, in addition to being an artist, you're a caretaker. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of mothers get pegged for questions like these. So I apologize for being a part of that crowd. I'm also a working mom. So I feel I feel the annoyance, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you have any concerns or anxieties about the idea of balance? I don't believe balance exists, but in terms of working in this industry that overworks artists and maintaining like a healthy family life, do you have any thoughts about when the industry opens up strategies for getting through that?
Yes, I have two little kids in my life. And I think that for a while, I found it quite hard to find a balance. I mean, not really a balance, just like to claim my space as a creative person, because I felt the responsibility towards caring for them, but also towards like having an income. And so, of course, the first thing to go out the window is the thing that A, doesn't care for them, and B, provides no income. So I think that it took me a while to understand that just because it doesn't provide an income instantaneously doesn't mean that it's not part of a viable career path, which allowed me to make more space for it. But it is interesting. I mean, one of the reasons that Leela Meadow-Connor and I started working together was I had this idea for some sort of program that would help women screenwriters who are also caregivers to kind of find a stepping stone between their finished screenplays and production. just recognizing the fact that there are a lot more hurdles for moms to overcome in this process that's already very hard. And it's funny, one of the things that we were just talking about that I was like, oh, why isn't this a thing? Whenever you fill out applications for grants or labs or contests or whatever, they ask questions about other things that are potential hurdles for you, like your background or your gender identity, like things like that. And I'm like, I really wish they would have a box for mom, which I think might sound very controversial, because, you know, becoming a mother is a choice as opposed to other identities that we're born with. I think that there is a lot of value in recognizing that that's like a big part of life, and that for women it also entails some hurdles, extra hurdles that they have to cross, and for there to be some recognition of that. Because right now I feel like if there's any recognition of that, it's kind of like the opposite. Like there might be some doubt as to your ability to do your job because you're a mom. And I think that I would usually, Gwyneth Paltrow would be the last person that I would ever quote. But I read an interview with her, I think it was in the New York Times, they did a piece on her. And she was asked about how she hires for her company. And she talked about hiring a lot of mothers. And I believe the quote is, "That bitch will get shit done." And I'm like, yes, Gwyneth, that's true. Because you do have a time crunch and you have to do a lot with the time that you have. So you will get shit done. So there you go.
So you've made a feature before this web series, you know, that you directed, starred in, and now you had this whole web series thing that happened where you 3 seasons. The question is, like, going out of your first feature into your web series and now coming out at the end of it, like, how have you changed as a director through that time? Like, or have you changed? Like, have you learned things like doing the Quarantine I Love You that you didn't know about yourself as a director after the first feature? And if so, what are they, and how are you going to take those into your next project?
Well, I guess my theme now, as I'm discovering it while speaking to you, is that a lot of times when I enter into projects, I don't really know that I'm doing the thing that I end up doing. So my feature, Scientist's Guide to Living and Dying, I knew that I was making a feature, but I didn't know that I was directing it. And I wasn't really directing it at first. My partner in child making and filmmaking is also a filmmaker. And he was the director for the beginning parts, for the production parts of it. And then I ended up being the director for the post-production, because it's a fictional narrative, but really it was made like a documentary, because we followed my own real life pregnancy. We filmed a little bit each month of my pregnancy, and then also after my pregnancy. And then we had a new baby, so we weren't touching the footage. And then it was about looking at the footage and seeing what else we needed with reshoots, and kind of piecing the narrative together, which had kind of shifted because it had evolved over the pregnancy. It was like making a documentary, but a fiction documentary with a real life pregnancy. So I only really became the director in this post, like in the editing, sound design, reshoot process. And I learned a lot from that project, namely also that I did want to direct more so than I wanted to act. And I think that in Quarantine I Love You, it's the first time I've really just had from beginning to end the writer, director, or creator role. I mean, even down to the editing. So it's made me excited about working, continuing to work in that way. Not that I wanted to have all the roles at the same time, but it definitely is the first time that it's felt appealing to me, this kind of showrunner possibility, either like doing a limited series or a regular series, or even for a film, but like just having that kind of big bird's eye view of like seeing a project through from start to finish. I don't know if that answered your question. I don't remember exactly what the question was, but
I
That's
mean,
my
yeah,
answer.
like at least like 75% of it. I guess the thing is, you know, what I'm really even after hearing your answer, I'm really curious. Like, you kind of developed as a director from your feature into this series, and now you know you're like a fully formed, confident director, writer, you know, producer. So, like now that you're in this position, like what challenges are you excited to take on in your next project, like, you know, having gone through this transformation through these two projects?
Yeah. I guess Quarantine I Love You was the first time I had kind of no strings attached, other people's money to make things with. Like I didn't have to do a Kickstarter, and I didn't have to do anything crazy to get the money, make a bake sale stand or anything. I just was like entrusted with the money that I needed to make the project happen. And I'm excited to continue that in the future, getting other people's money to make things. But I think it's given me the confidence also to be able to do that, because I think like that's kind of the natural next progression, stepping stone from like super scrappy, using my own life savings and other people's life savings to make things to something more sustainable and having the kind of support that I need to do that. Yeah, so I'm excited to. I mean, the two feature films that I'm working on are not scrappy, low budget scripts, and I don't want to scrapify them in order to make it possible. I would like to actually be able to dream big and to create these big worlds, which is what I'm naturally drawn to, I think, as a creator. So I'm hoping to kind of like take this energy and momentum and sense of confidence in my abilities and to move forward into newer and bigger projects than I've done so far.
So I think I can just like hear like a listener hearing the show and whisper to themselves, yeah, but how? So like what is that next step? Is it connecting with the producer of the show and working with them? Is it attaching talent? What do you see as the next step to getting the project made?
Yes, I think my next step specifically for one of the projects, doing a reading with the biggest kind of talent that I can get attached with the connections that I now have with it, my casting director and the agencies of the actors that we've worked with, and possibly some of the actors themselves. Ideally, there's like 4 main lead roles. And if I can get an actor who's sufficiently interested, I feel like that would be the first step. It is really hard to have like a clear, like, this is how you do things, which is why it's like so mind-bogglingly difficult, because there isn't like a blueprint, because what worked for one person may not work for another. And even if it sort of does, it's a little bit different, like that you can never exactly replicate things until you've made it, quote unquote, whatever the hell that means. So I think you just kind of amble along. I mean, I have another friend who is in pre-production on her first feature. And whenever I do make my feature, I will feel like it will be my first feature, because my first feature, I didn't really direct it from start to finish, and it was more of an experiment that resulted in a feature film. But anyway, my friend who's working on her first feature, so her script placed really highly in a really reputable competition. And that's helped her secure a producer, and the producer is helping her secure the funding. So I think I have a sense of some different routes that I can go. The second script that is in earlier stages of development, I am consciously writing it as a lower budget than this other one that's really kind of ridiculous. Like, it's a Melissa McCarthy kind of movie. So the other one, I'm trying to not make that, just so I do have an option that's maybe a little bit more realistic. I don't know. It's like the thing that everyone says of like faking it till you make it, which again, as I was saying before, it's such a risky proposition. You really have to kind of somehow believe that you're able to do it and then convince everyone else that that's true. However you can. So I don't know exactly how that will be, but I'll notify you if it works.
Let us know what you find out.
Yeah, so I think that's on a good note to end with or get to our final 5 questions. So I'll start first. What's the first film you ever made, and how do you feel about it now?
First film I ever made was called I Am God. I had just dropped out of school and moved to New York and was living in an illegal loft in Bushwick. And I was 19 and had never studied filmmaking. And I'm from Israel originally, and I wrote this short film that I thought would solve peace in the Middle East. And so I just talked with as many filmmaker people that I'd met in New York as I could. And essentially their bottom line was like, it's crazy what you're trying to do, but you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. So that's to your advantage because you slog your way through it, which is really like with Quarantine, I Love You, and like with my feature Scientist's Guide to Living and Dying, I just kind of like went into something not knowing what I was doing and figured it out as I went along. So so after my first year in New York, after having dropped out of school, I went to Israel that summer, met up with some people who I got connected with in New York, used my savings from my bat mitzvah, and and made this film. Like I just spent this summer in Tel Aviv making this film about a man who arrives in Israel and believes himself suddenly to be God, and meets with a young Palestinian man. So that was my first film. And how do I feel about it now? I mean, I have a lot of love for it just because of what it was and the process that went into making it and the kind of the insanity that was trying to get that thing together. And my intention behind it, which I feel like I've learned that in order to make films with any sort of social impact, you also have to have a good sense of humor, which I think maybe that film did not have enough of. So that's what I've learned. But I do still love it in my own way. Maybe others don't. I mean, obviously, likely not, but I do.
What's the best filmmaking advice you've ever received?
I guess the best advice was that kind of pat on the back that I got going into making this, like that if you don't know what you're getting yourself into, then you're probably in the best possible spot, because if you knew how hard it was going to be, the chances of you going and doing it would be pretty small. So best to just go into it with all of your passion and energy and vision and not think about how hard it's going to be, because there's nothing you can do about that.
Do you have a goal as a filmmaker?
I mean, I think that I haven't seen a lot of films that are perfect for me in my vision, in my experience of them. And even like a filmmaker who I love and adore many of their films, but they made one film that was really perfect. I would like to make that one perfect film at one point in my life that I know is really perfect. And I think, I don't remember what it's, some show on NPR. I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was Ira Glass. But they had this thing about how when you're an artist and you're making your work.
It's Ira Glass.
And it is Ira Glass, yeah. Right? And you know it's not good enough yet, but you know that it's not good enough. But you're like you still keep going. And I want to get to a place where I make the thing that I know is good enough. And I know it. And there's never going to be a consensus, because some of the films I think are most brilliant and other people didn't like. But I want to know that I made the best freaking film that I can make.
I want to have a side chat here, because I've been thinking about this a lot lately, because another guest of ours answered, like, I want to make that one good movie, that one movie that feels like, a Taxi Driver or, whatever, like a Jaws or something. But the thing is, like, I don't think Steven Spielberg walks around thinking Jaws is perfect, or Scorsese walks around thinking Raging Bull is perfect, like these movies that we hold as such high regard. So I almost think that that's a myth. Like we're never going to have that feeling, no matter how
not
great
perfect,
of a movie.
but good, that I know that I made something good. I guess not perfect. They
must know those movies are good, I guess, right?
I think they know they're good. I hope so. I feel like maybe Charlie Kaufman, who really is my idol. I feel like maybe he goes around wondering if his movies are good.
Yeah. He
I feel
probably
like
thinks they're
Spielberg-
trash.
I know, he's like, oh, what a terrible movie. But I feel like Spielberg and Scorsese, they're like, oh yeah, that's a good film.
It's about self-esteem too.
Yes.
If you could go back in time, what's the piece of advice you would give yourself?
I'm really conflicted about this. Like when I do my own revisionist history of like what my life could have been like if I'd made other choices or had gotten better advice. And part of me is like, oh yeah, I'd be like much further along and more successful and everything would be perfect. But I also feel like I do have this kind of like woo-woo sensibility of things kind of being the way they are for a reason, and our paths kind of unfolding the way they unfold for a reason. So it's more of an advice that I give myself now constantly, which is just to like hold fast to that understanding that I'm living my one unique life and it isn't going to look like anyone else's, and my successes and failures and creations will not look like anyone else's, and to just like be at peace with that, because there's like this old Jewish saying, I think it's Jewish, I don't know, I heard it as a Jewish saying, with Moses like going up to heaven and opening up the gates, and God opens up the gates and he doesn't ask Moses, why weren't you X, Y, Z? It's like you're meant to live your life as your own unique individual. And I totally butchered whatever that saying was. But the point is that when you die and go to heaven, no one will ask you why you weren't Barbara Streisand, because Barbara Streisand was Barbara Streisand. So
and also Mirror with Mirror with Two Faces is not that good. Like, let's be honest. Right. Like, you don't want to compare yourself to that. Anyway.
Exactly.
Is making movies hard?
It's super hard for sure. Yeah, it is really hard. I think it's an enormous undertaking. It's like building a business, an entire business. And like, how many people do you know that keep scrapping whatever business they had and starting to build a new one all the time? I mean, that feels like, again, very dodgy business proposition. Yeah, I think it is hard. But I think that, when I was studying acting, the thing that I feel like every acting teacher would always be like, if you can do anything else, then do that. Like, don't do this. This is the worst thing. This is the hardest thing ever. If you can be anything else, go be that. Don't be an actor. And I was like, no, but I really want to be an actor. But then after I made my feature and had a kid, and I wasn't acting for a while, I was like, oh, I'm getting by without being an actor. But I apparently cannot get by without writing and without filmmaking. So it is really hard, but if you can't not do it, then I guess you don't have a choice.
We are out of time. So sell your wares. Tell us how people can support you.
Well, you can watch Quarantine I Love You. It's QILY, Quarantine I Love You. You can Google it, put it in YouTube. And like the Quarantine I Love You page and the episodes and whatever, and share them with your friends. And you can also go on my website, Nitzan Mager, and send me a note, because I'd like to be your pen pal. And when I do make my feature, then please go watch that too.
Alrik, what do you remember about Nitzan?
I remember that she was very charming. And I thought, like, going into the conversation, that we were talking to somebody who had like directed their first feature, which is true, she had. And then she would done this whole show, and then she was working on her next thing. But like, what was really interesting to me about the conversation was like kind of learning that like she was sort of growing into this director role through Quarantine I Love You. And that when she co-directed her first feature, it was more, she didn't really feel like the ownership over it in the same way that, you normally do over a project when you direct it. And so it was kind of, I really liked like kind of her kind of chronicling her growth into being a director and a writer and an actor, and not just one of those things, And so I thought that was very interesting. And I think like kind of different than most of our conversations. But what about you? Do you remember anything about her conversation?
I remember how like whenever we have an actress producer on the show, you and I always have this side conversation where I was like, why doesn't she direct? I'm so frustrated that she's letting someone else direct her content, whoever this actress producer is. And it made me really happy when Nitzan was like, I don't care about acting as much anymore. I just love directing. Like, she found this love that I feel like a lot of actress producers that I know really do want to direct. They're just not willing to admit it. And it made me, basically I'm saying she made me feel validated in my opinion that a lot of actresses and producers are bomb directors, are just like amazing directors, and that they should try it more. So I remember feeling right and feeling validated.
Yeah, it was almost like a transition from acting to directing in a way, and that was one of the more fascinating parts about it, is that like her love of art changed through her being an artist, which was really, really interesting. Yeah.
Get Shorty.
So you make movies, huh?
I produce feature motion pictures.
I got an idea for a movie.
So this week we have a short from writer-director Charnstar Anderson, who we've talked about on the show quite a bit because he's been on to talk about his film Lace, which we had on many, many, many moons ago. And then he recommended a filmmaker to the show, to Get Shorty. And so, you know, like he sent in this other movie, but like kind of right before he recommended these other filmmakers. And I was like, you know what, let's just put this in the back burner, Charnstar. I'm not quite ready to have a repeat filmmaker. I watched the movie at the time. I loved it. So it was kind of hard because I liked it so much to be like, no. And like almost wondering like, why didn't he send this to us? But I guess I get it. It was more, the other one's more personal film. This is more just crazy balls fun. But anyways, without me ruining it, let's hear Charnstar talk about Pizza Deliverance.
Hi, Liz and Alrik. Thanks again for having me back and watching all of my dumb films. I feel like there's better ones out there, so hopefully more people get in contact with you, but in the meantime, I'm happy to fill the void. Cool, so when it came to Pizza Deliverance, the reason I made it a short rather than any other medium is probably purely down to experience. This was my grad film coming out of uni, so, you know, a short film is a lot easier than making a feature for your first time. It was the second short that I had made. I'd made one action comedy short before that called L-Plates, which was a lot smaller in scale. With Pizza Deliverance, I wanted to make it much bigger, but making a feature right out of uni was too much for me. I think the story being about a pizza delivery guy makes it probably obvious that I was a pizza delivery guy. I was delivering pizzas for 6-7 years. It was always my side hustle, as I'm sure it is for plenty of people in our industry. And I always, you know, wanted things to be more exciting. I feel like most people feel that way. And it was funny because a lot of feedback I got from the film, people couldn't buy into such a crazy idea. They were like, oh, surely, you know, you'd reveal at the end it's all in his head or something. And I would always say, why would I do that? This is all in my head. Why would I make it in someone else's head? If I'm going to make a story about it, I'm just going to make the story that's in my head, which is silly fun times. Coming up with the funds was, boy, that was a job. We did crowdfunding, which was great. You know, we did Kickstarter. We had a very large social media push. I was doing like live videos after every shift at Domino's, just like pushing the film out there as much as possible. We did a live stream on Kickstarter because Kickstarter was like doing this telethon style thing where you could pledge money while watching the video. So me and my producer Des ended up eating a 1 meter diameter pizza. It was a competition at this pizza store where it cost $40, but if you actually finished the whole thing within an hour, you got $100. So it would have been $60 to the film. We didn't succeed. I threw up blood and it was all on glorious HD. But that live stream actually ended up earning us $300 in pledges. So that like paid in itself. Absolutely. Rounding off after Kickstarter finished, we ended up doing a second crowdfunding push through what we have in Australia called the Australian Cultural Fund, or the ACF. It's essentially, rather than getting physical stuff back, you're able to get tax incentive back. So every donation via the ACF is tax deductible. So that was really good for going towards businesses. And we figured the idea of the film is meant to be looking at a small business being taken over. We could approach some of those small businesses. My producer actually had bigger ideas, and he ended up sending out this massive 3-page email to the Australian CEO of Domino's, Don Mager, I was able to get his email because I was an employee there. it was listing off, how we love pizza and we love film and we just want to get the art out into the world. And Don ended up replying with just one line, which was, "How much do you want?" Now, at this point, I was like, just ask for a cool mill, just cool mill. He's a CEO. He can handle a cool mill. Des ended up just asking for $1,000, but we got that $1,000 straight from Domino's into the ACF, tax deductible for them, $1,000 for us. Brilliant. And we ended up overall earning, I think it was an extra $4,000 or an extra $3,000 via the ACF for a $7,000 budget overall. We had to spend a lot of money on prosthetics and stuff because I really wanted to see someone's face get smashed in. So money. Before making the short, like any of us, I was graduating from uni, so I was like, I'm going to make this film, and it's going to be the Toast of Cannes, and I'm going to be some great heralded filmmaker. Obviously, that didn't happen, but it did further my career in ways that I definitely cannot complain about. I'm so grateful for the opportunities that Pizza Deliverance ended up giving me. I was able to work with some great companies doing a transmedia advertisement campaign for one of our festival runs for a local festival, the West End Film Festival, which was really great working in this completely different atmosphere. And then also, people loved the film, and because it was able to get into so many local festivals, people started coming to me and actually wanting me to work with them, which had never happened before. I ended up getting hired for some writing gigs. So far, none of them have been made, but hell, I've been able to write something for someone else. It's an opportunity I never would have thought I would have had 5 years ago. And even now, I finally got a full-time position at a post-production house in Brisbane, which is like kind of what I was always working towards, but I never really thought it would happen. So the fact that it's happening now and the people there are seeing Pizza Deliverance and going, oh yeah, we want to work with this guy. It's, unbelievable, honestly. Now that it's out in the world, I'm hoping that at least people have fun with it. That's all I ever wanted from it, was that people have fun and they look at my dumb stuff and think, this guy, he's a fun, dumb guy. And I hope at least it does that. I don't know if I would do anything story-wise for the short, but I've always wanted to make it a feature. I always kind of looked this as a proof of concept for a feature. If I were to do a feature, it wouldn't be so Die Hard focused. It would definitely be more Lethal Weapon focused, with the entire story unraveling of why are all these customers disappearing. Oh, it's because there's a big company coming through. I'd be kind of playing off that really lame 90s stereotype where every film was about a big company taking over the little company, but in the style of a Shane Black action thriller. I haven't gotten around to that yet. Hopefully one day, just not today. As for stunts and actions, I think the most obvious one that I'm missing is a car chase. Absolutely, I wanted to do a car chase. You're going to do a pizza delivery film, you want to have a pizza delivery chase. Half of what we do is in our car. I didn't have the budget for that. We raised like $7,000, but unfortunately, driving cars at high speed costs slightly more than that, so unfortunately I couldn't. That's definitely, that's the beginning of the third act for the feature, is an epic car chase, but until then, I'll just have to survive with me getting my face smashed in and having blood splattered everywhere. I couldn't ask for more, really. Thanks again for watching my films, guys, and I hope more of my friends end up contacting you, because I will keep annoying them. For you guys and for me.
Can we admit that this show is called Making Movies? Okay, it's called Making Movies is Hard, hosted by the two of us, co-starring Gary Kennedy and Charnstar Anderson. Like,
they do have a lot of repeat appearances, don't they?
Yes. And then with like oh my God, who are those amazing people out of Texas that I like always remember the names of?
Travis and
Madison, with
Madison,
Travis
yeah.
and Madison. Like
right,
that is
exactly.
what that is our show. Sorry, I didn't mean to deviate from the goal of talking about Get Shorty. Tell me why you love this movie. I want to hear about it.
Well, so I watched up a little bit of it again this morning just because I hadn't seen it in a while. And one of the things I really appreciate is like the very first line of the movie. Like, if you're not paying attention and you don't know what the movie is, like it almost doesn't really make sense because he's like, "Oh yeah, are you like some sort of plant for Romo's pizza or something?"
Right.
And you're like, "Plant for Romo's? Like, what are they talking about?" And then like and then it's like turns into this big like, the Pizza Palace versus Romo's Pizza sort of like thing, and it's like
Romeo.
Romeo.
I think
Yeah,
hard to
either
tell with the
one.
accent, but I thought it was Romeo.
Romeo Pizza.
I don't know.
But I really appreciate like the amount of story they jam into like every minute of this movie, and I love the world building around like these like warring like pizza places and like with this extreme violence, and I thought it was really fun. I like the one-liners. I like that you just get right into it. And I thought that like for a low budget movie, the action was actually pretty good. I was like, this is awesome. But
And the makeup was really good too, like consistent and the effects. No, I really, really enjoyed this one. And I found myself asking the same question that you did, was like, why didn't he send this one first? I think this is, I know you liked Lace. I wasn't the biggest fan of Lace, but this one, it's like, seems just eon stronger to me. I would say the only real weaknesses of this are like convenient villains. Like it was really convenient that the villains weren't as good of fighters as the Pizza Palace fighters were. Like they were just kind of caught off guard very easily, and not always capitalizing on opportunities to kill the Pizza Palace protagonists. So I would say they're very convenient as villains. And I thought some of the sound actually was a little too much. It was like they had like gross makeout noises when they were making out, and the music was like this kind of like Mickey Mouse like doo, 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 doo music. Yeah. But I love the names. I was catching that they were they referenced Die Hard in like every single character name that they had. Yeah, I thought it was really funny, really clever. I kept trying to think, what would I cut out of this? Because it felt a little long, but I couldn't think of anything to cut out. It was like the script was really tight. Maybe the edit could have been slightly tighter. That's my only complaint.
I don't know. I don't really know what I would complain about this movie. I mean, it was fun. I enjoyed it. It was so goofy, and it was obviously made with a love of these like 90s action movies, especially Die Hard, and there was a lot of like over the top jokes and silliness, and I always appreciate that. Like the making out thing, I think I laughed at that over the top sound effect thing. I mean, it's gross, but it's funny. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I could probably go through it with a fine-tooth comb and find things I didn't like about it and things I complain about. But I think overall it was just a damn good time. And for these kinds of indie action shorts, like I think you can't really do much better than this. So I hope everyone watches it.
I didn't even know that Charnstar did it because I didn't read the emails that you just said watch this, and I watched it. And at the very end, I just saw in the credits visual effects by Charnstar, and I was like, Charnstar's everywhere. Like I didn't know that he had directed it. I thought that he was just recommending another film by another person that he had worked on. But yeah, Charnstar's like our buddy. Good job. Good job, bud.
Yeah, I think side note, believe this is his first short film that he ever directed. And then I can't remember the story of how he got the money together or how this thing came apart, but it was like part of some sort of contest or something that he won. There was or grant or something. There was something that came about of him having this opportunity and then like having some money to spend. And then he like hired a bunch of like people with more experience than him to like, help him make the movie. Yeah, but anyways, hopefully he talks about it in his little piece that we just heard. But anyways, let us know. Do you guys dig this or do you hate it? We'd love to hear.
All right, so we have to get to the nitty gritty of whatever you want to talk about, right? Alrik, you had something you wanted to, whatever you want to do. Let's talk about feelings and goals and aspirations.
Oh, it sounds like you're dreading this.
No, but I did take notes because I was like, I don't even know what my answer is for these questions. But please set us up way better than I did.
Well, this is just something I started feeling like this way like last week, and I think I've been kind of feeling this way since the Jen McGowan conversation, because she did bring up some good points of like, you should have a specific goal, you should have a plan, like you should know exactly what you're wanting to do. And I mean, I feel like those are good points, but I feel like in one hand, it's like, isn't it a goal enough to tell great stories and to make films and to, grow as a filmmaker and like make your art as good as it possibly can be, and then just try to step stone up towards the next bigger thing? And that's kind of like where my head's at with my filmmaking and like what I'm trying to accomplish. And obviously wherever things go, they go. But that's my approach, is like each one should be a better story, like a tighter movie. Doesn't necessarily have to be a bigger budget, but just the movie itself should be better each time. So I'm just thinking, like, you watch all these movies, like we have all these filmmakers on the show, and at some point you're like, what is the point, man? Like we have like all these movies that we talk about, they come up, they go on to services, they appear, they're available for rent, and then they're gone in the ether. Like even the Nicolas Cage, Wally's Wonderland movie, or Willy's Wonderland, whatever that's called. Like that's like another example. It's like, is that movie gonna have any lasting impact? Are people gonna be know or think about this movie in a year from now, or is it just gonna be like another Nick Cage movie that like slips in a year, and like another like low budget action movie and another low budget sci-fi movie? And it's like I'm thinking back to when I was a kid, and like, the lasting impressions that you had when you go to a movie theater and you see films like, Independence Day, or like, like any kind of special movie that we all remember. It's like, do those movies, like, can they even exist anymore? Or is it just going to be like Marvel movie after Marvel movie? And like, are these special cinematic moments being created still? Or is it now just indie films that are forgotten and big budget Marvel movies that, are being pushed out to the masses?
Where's the middle class? So, I mean, it's that I think about middle class, but it's actually the mid-tier budget film that you're talking about, right? Where it's not the tentpole film and it's original IP and it's just telling it's the Spielberg. You're talking about Spielberg films in the late 80s,
maybe,
early,
yeah, or just like the low budget or the lower budget, like thrillers, or even like the dramas, like Frankie and Johnny, like with Al Pacino and Michelle Pfeiffer from like the 80s. Like these movies, like are they gonna get made anymore? Like, are there gonna be these kinds of other films that you can see, or is it really just gonna be like the low budget, like down and dirty indies, or the Marvels? Like,
or the Oscar fair? Because like what you're describing, I mean, it's like I saw The Father this year. I was one of the very few people I know who watched The Father with Anthony Hopkins, which was amazing, terrifying film. But yeah, it was like basically a 3-hander, 4-hander, but really kind of a 2-hander. And it's like, where else would this film get any attention other than leading up to the Oscars? Like a really thoughtful, substantial drama with really good performances that doesn't have a gimmick to it. But anyway, you started talking about something and then it kind of evolved to something else, but you started talking about goals, right?
Right.
And I think it's a really scary question to tackle, because I really genuinely feel on Monday, I'm like, oh, it's Monday, and Mondays are scary and intimidating. And you're like, am I going to get everything done? And the next thing you know, it's Thursday night and you're like, where did the week go? So what I'm saying is, I like what Jen is saying about taking stock and figuring out your goals and then kind of working from there. Because if you don't work strategically, your week will disappear without you having progressing on those goals. But I agree that I don't know what my goals are either, other than to continue to make content. And what's even weirder from my perspective is like I quit my job this year. So I'm consulting, but there's nothing, as you know, stable about consulting. And my husband's working, and this is the first time where I'm not the breadwinner. So it's this idea of like, oh, am I receding into this like weird, like, I don't know, dependent? Like, am I receding into dependent status as I work on my films? Like, do you ever worry about that? The idea of like, if you haven't set up your economics right, but if you don't have the money, you have the time, but then the industry is so unpredictable in terms of what projects are going to go, you could just be waiting forever to make the content, and then you're not contributing to yourself, your career, your pocketbook. See, now I'm just spinning us out to a whole another bigger question. And it's not helpful for me to do that. But it is what I'm inspired by to talk about, is that like you have to have a goal, but then like there is no way to have a plan because there's so much is out of your control.
Yeah. I mean, it also kind of comes back to what you're saying, at least in my mind, comes back to this thing that we've talked about before, where it's like, do you wait for permission to make a film, or do you just go out there and hustle your project together and you know, build it from the ground up each time and make your film, you know?
Yeah.
And I kind of feel like it's like in the one world, it's like, oh yeah, it would be great if like you would just get that budget, get that deal, win that directing job, you know, get that next project going so you can, you know, perpetuate your career and like just continue directing film after film after film, you know, hopefully with a budget behind it, hopefully with a paycheck behind it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I think for most of us, it's probably going to be the same way that you made your first two features, where it's like you're, you know, basically generating the project from the ground up by yourself. And then that's just what you do every time. Yeah. And I guess what I'm trying to understand for myself and trying to figure out is like, is that what I want for my life? And is that something that I would be happy with? And, you know, it's hard to really know until you do it a bunch. Like you can't just judge it off of one, not even two, maybe.
But then if you do it a bunch, then it takes years. So then you're lost 5, 6, 7 years of your life testing to see, iterating to see if that's what you want, which is crazy, I think.
But as a filmmaker, isn't that the goal, just to have a body of work and to have personal growth as a filmmaker and a storyteller and as an artist? And like, as long as you're growing and you're getting closer to like, you know, like, I can't remember which guest said it, but they're like, oh yeah, I hope to make a movie that is great one day. Maybe it was Larry Fessenden was like, one day it'd be awesome to make a movie that was great. You know, and I haven't done it yet, but hopefully one day I will. Maybe it's not Larry Fessenden. Maybe it was somebody else.
It's not Larry Fessenden. I'm like, I cannot picture him saying that at all.
Was that Dan Mervish? I can't remember. It was somebody.
Dan Mervish wanted to be a filmmaker. I remember that. I was like, what's your goal? Be a filmmaker. Then he ended there. That was the end of the answer. Though that is the thing. That is, you want to get better and better, right? You want to be a better and better storyteller. But I think you have to diversify. Like what I'm doing right now is I'm pitching on other people's features that are fully funded or are in the process of applying for funds. Like I'm making inroads in other projects while I'm developing my own. And I think you kind of have to do that. It's like one for them, one for you. You have to kind of like navigate career as a job and also something really personal. Or else if it's just personal projects, then it's a hobby, I think. And it's okay if it's a hobby, but you're not building a career that way.
Yeah, but are you or aren't you? Right? Like, I guess that's my question. I think that's where I would challenge. If I had Jen right here, right now, that's probably what I would say to her is like, well, what's wrong with making your own movie after movie after movie? Like, why isn't that a career? Why isn't that a filmmaking?
Because you're not making money.
Yeah, but if you're not, so, but eventually, but everyone had to start at some place where they were doing that, right? Like, it's not like, unless you're like Tim Burton in the 90s, you're not getting your first film as a paycheck, right? Like, how many people could you say now have gotten their first film as a paycheck film, as a career film? Like, you basically have to start somewhere. And like, you know, if it takes 4 movies to get to that paycheck, is that really bad? Or is that wasted time to you? Or do you feel like why is that less legitimate than, you know, doing it the other way where you're only taking paid work after you've, you know, got your calling card film set up?
I don't think it's less legitimate. I just think that the model, like, I can't figure out the economics of the model of the one film after another that you bootstrap. And I'm thinking of like Willy's Wonderland guy. What is his name? Kevin.
Kevin. Yeah, Kevin.
And he was saying he runs a med spa. And I was thinking of Dan Mervish on how his wife has a lucrative job. And I'm thinking of all these people, mostly men, whose wives have lucrative jobs and they get to make these movies. And there seems to be this kind of like economic inequality in these like partnerships. So I feel like my suspicion is the way people have managed to sustain a life where they're making these bootstrap movies over and over again is that they have an asset like a spouse or real estate or money from their family that allows them to do that. It's not less legitimate. It's just like, it's going to bleed you, I think, is the problem. The economics of it don't make sense. And that's why we're looking at like pod filmmaking or doing a slate of films at once, because without the wholesale model, it's just so expensive. I think the base, I mean, yeah, you can make a movie for $5,000-$10,000, but I really think the base level for an indie is like $75K if you're doing it and paying people
for like a drama, even like not even a horror movie, you know, because horror, sci-fi, those things, they start to require other expenses that, you know, don't necessarily fall into that 75,000, you know? I guess it's like, if you're raising the money and you're like bootstrapping it however you can, whether it's your own money or it's someone else's money, like, you know, I guess I guess it's all up to you if you feel like that's terrible or not. Like if you feel like
other
that's
people
like
gamble,
a terrible right?
There's gamblers. There's people take vacations. There's people who go and, you know, they do extreme sports. They hike. They mountain climb. Like I think we just chose a really expensive hobby. Is how I choose to look at it.
I guess when to you does it only turns from a hobby to a career or a hobby to a portfolio of work when you're making money at it? Is that basically, or is it critical acclaim? Is that part of it? Or what to you, like what makes it legitimate? Is it like, does it have to be money and like critical acclaim, or could it just be critical acclaim, or does it have to, or could it just be like the goodness of the work? Like where is it for you?
Well, I think it's about defining the word career, or maybe we want to define the word job rather than career, because career is so malleable. But a job is something that sustains you. So if you are getting future jobs from that film, if you are getting compensated financially, if you're making partnerships, I mean, it's very malleable. And I guess what I'm thinking is like, okay, so I quit my job this year to become freelance, but I have to admit the past 2 weeks, I've spent more time on my own writing than I have consulting. And it's freaking me out. Alrik, it's like really scaring me.
Because you don't think like you don't see the future, like, you know, jobs or clients coming necessarily.
Yeah. It's like, I could work my ass off and try to get a bunch of clients and make a nominal more money and then have less time for writing. Or I could just say, I'm taking a few selfish years and I'm going to lean on my partner and I'm going to write and I'm going to get projects off the ground. But in terms of legitimacy, I don't think there's a line in the sand. But I wouldn't tell people I'm a filmmaker, because the majority of my money. You wouldn't
tell yourself you're a filmmaker.
If someone's like, what do you do? I say I work in distribution. That's what I tell people.
You should also say that you're a filmmaker too, though. I mean, you've made multiple films. You're actively making films. I don't feel like you can't, like, I don't think you should take that away from yourself just because you're not being paid to do it necessarily.
I think that's healthy. That's a really healthy piece of advice. But I think the question you're asking is so like potent that I like can't even figure out a pathway to an answer. I'm just like thinking of 5 million other things that are tied to it that freak me out. And in terms of like, why do we do what we do? You know, I didn't have that ET experience or that Star Wars experience that everyone else had.
So I mean, like watching something in the theater or when you were younger that like really it struck you in a big way.
Never had that. I wanted to be an actress, and then I went from being an actress to wanting to direct. So for me, it was just about a natural transition from acting. But most filmmakers that we know, they see some like amazing film in the theaters and they feel inspired in awe of that, and they want to be a part of that, right? The magic.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I've talked about this before, but it was, I don't know if it was a certain movie. It was more like that was the thing I loved more than anything, was always movies. Like that was, if someone was to ask me like what I wanted to do when I was a kid, the answer would always be watch a movie. That was like the thing that I just was so drawn to always. And I never thought I could do it until I was much older. Like probably not until high school when I was like, oh, maybe I could actually do this. Like I don't live in Los Angeles, but there is a path for me to actually, make my own movies, and then it just, from there, it was over. That's all I wanted to do. And I think it's still all I want to do. It's like, when I think about like things I could spend my time on, it's like, there's other things I have interest in, like working out or like Muay Thai, kickboxing, or, I just got chickens that I'm raising, which is really fun.
That is literally my life dream, is to have chickens. That's so cool. Okay, sorry, go on.
It's very easy. We thought it was hard at first. We were like, oh, how are we going to get these chickens into their coop? Because we didn't actually get babies. We got adult chickens. And apparently they just actually go into their coop at night because they want to, and you don't have to catch them.
And you get fresh eggs and you get to hang out with chickens.
We've gotten 5 so far since Sunday. So that's been magical. And they are the best pets. They're really sweet. So anyways, I keep on, my wife keeps on reminding me that we have really sweet chickens because they get out of our hand and they don't run from us when we approach them, which is like, I guess what chickens normally do. And so like, I think we got lucky, but anyways, big fan of chickens. But I guess I think like through talking to you, like I've kind of found out my own answer, because it's like, just making the movie is a thing that I really like, and I like the challenge of it. I like it's like this amazing goal to try to make a good movie, like just making a movie is really hard. Like we've talked about this 1,000 times, but trying to make a good movie is like damn near impossible. And you see the people with money fail at it all the time. Even the legends who are really good at had made many, many good movies will continually make bad movies. And it's like there is no answer to how to do it. And so it's like this amazing magical thing of like things just coming together to be a part of that and to be there either as a producer, as a director, at whatever, like that would be really special to be like a part of a really like a good movie that people respond to. So that's what I'm like searching for and will maybe be searching for the rest of my life. But I don't think, to me, like it doesn't take anything away if I'm not getting paid to do it necessarily. Like I obviously will pay myself on my next movie just because I think I have to. Like when I raise money, like I'll definitely take a paycheck, unless maybe I won't, but I probably will. But like, yeah, I don't know. It's just something that I think I'll always do. I don't know. Like I think people who listen to the Jan McGowan episode, I'm curious, like, what the reaction is going to be. Like, it's like, oh my gosh, if I'm not like striving towards television, like there's no point. It's like, I don't know, maybe there is.
I love that reflection you just had. And I'm also just thinking, I looked back at my notes because I knew you were asking this question because I read the outline. And I wrote a bunch of things, but the last thing I wrote was nothing else drives me crazy the way this does, And I think that's part of it. Like Sean, my husband, he drives me batshit crazy. He drives me nuts and I love him. You know what I mean? So I think things that I love drive me crazy. And so I think that's also it. It's like there's this push and this pull that we're drawn to that gets under our skin, that kind of unravels us a little bit. And maybe that's why it's really hard to find a rational reason for why we do it. And I don't know about legitimacy. I think that's our own personal war, whether we call ourselves a filmmaker or not, right? But as long as you keep on starting projects and keep on trying to make movies, then you must love it. Right.
Yeah. And then if you finish them, hopefully you're finishing them too. I think that's a big part of it. Cause like you can start a million of them, but like, it doesn't really become a movie unless you finish it. So I think that's sort of another thing that I think about a lot is like, yeah, that thing that you wrote down, 10 years ago that you haven't actually turned into a script yet. Like you could still turn that into a script. That still could be something, you know, or that movie that you wrote 40 pages of, but you haven't actually finished. Like you could turn that into a project one day. Like it still has power in the half form that it's in. So I don't know. That's another part of it that I think find really fascinating, you know. But yeah, I don't know. And I mean, what's going to happen to my movie? This is also because like, I mean, like at this movie I'm finishing right now, I'm going to submit it to, I'm submitting it to film festivals. I don't know what the future of the movie is. Like, but like, what is it going to be? Is it going to just live on some service somewhere and like maybe 10 people will watch it and who knows? Or will it get more attention? Like, will people actually seek out this film? Will I have, you know, a few reviews somewhere? Who knows, you know, but I don't know. I guess it's undetermined. And I think whatever does happen with it, like I should just be, I don't know. I need to be happy with it because, you know, being upset about it isn't going to do anything.
I was thinking, I wrote a list of like movies that made me feel something. And it's like, I was just thinking there's this movie called Hotel de Love that no one's heard of that made me, I loved that movie with Saffron Burrows. And then I was thinking of Drag Me to Hell, where there's a scene where it makes me want to throw up and laugh at the same time, which it's a peak emotion for me. You know, but you just think about these moments in media and it's like, these aren't Oscar movies. These aren't tentpole films. These could get forgotten by the majority of the population, you know? So, but I do think, you know, people have come to you after seeing your short films and they said, God, that was great. You know, you did impact someone for however length that you can't control it, but you did. So it may get forgotten in the hallways of media, but I think you'll always have that moment where you actually connected with someone. Wow, I am pulling out all of the corn today.
No, I mean, I think that's important to remember those, like, because even like the YouTube comments on some of the shorts I made, like those can bring, you know, even if it's a small, like, oh, that was great. It's like, oh, wow, amazing. Yeah. You know, like it doesn't have to be like a, you know, a big, you know, review or like lots of words about your film. It could just be like, oh, enjoyed that one. Sweet. Can't wait to see what you do next. It's like, oh, that, you know, those are the things that make all the difference. So yeah,
you profoundly impacted them, even though it may not be them crying or laughing their heads off or whatever, but you actually reached out and impacted them. That is cool. Yeah. I never really believed that until I'm saying it to you. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we should end this episode now.
About time.
Yeah, seriously.
So if you want to reach out to us and engage in this philosophical tirade, there are many ways to do that, including writing a YouTube comment, which we love so much. You could do that on a YouTube page, or you can support the show on Patreon, www.patreon.com/MMIH podcast. Give whatever you can. Thank you in advance. You can send us a question, comment, or suggestion to podcast@makingmoviesishard.com. If you like the show, you can leave a review on iTunes or any of the places you can leave reviews for podcasts. Finally, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at MMIH Podcast, and YouTube at Making Movies is Hard Podcast.
And thanks everyone for listening, and thanks to Nitzan Mager for making this episode happen. Check out our website at makingmoviesishard.com, where you can find links to the things we talked about in this episode. One day, not today, but one day it'll be on the website again. And thanks to editor Cameron, probably me, maybe, for doing the editing. I don't know who's going to do it yet. Maybe Cameron. I have to check our bank account. Do we have enough money to pay Cameron this week? I don't know. But thanks for listening, everybody, and we'll talk to you guys next week.
I'm going to say, I'm going to say stuff. This week, we welcome writer, director, and actor Nitzan Mager to, I hope I said that right. Oh, fuck, I'm going to try it one more time just in case. Okay, I really hope I said her last name wrong. Right. Oh, I don't know. I just hope I said her name right.
I think you said it right. I think it's good.
It's the last name I'm worried about, not the first, because she said pizza, and I can remember that.
Yeah, she said Nissan and pizza together. It's like, I'll never forget that. Yeah. What a weird combo.
Pizza's really important.